Prepare to journey back through time in this episode of Rock and Roll Flashback Podcasts.
Welcome to Rock and Roll Flashback. I'm Jumpin John McDermott, and we'll be looking back at some of rock and roll's greatest artists, songs, and stories. Today's podcast is Shades of Past, Recollections of a Garage Band Part 2. This podcast recalls one of America's most underappreciated garage bands, Monroeville, Pennsylvania's The Limited Sensation Domaine. From their humble beginnings as the Quad Squad in 1963, this band evolved into the Astronomical Survey, then to Steel Hog, and eventually to the Limited Sensation Domaine. The Domaine peaked in popularity around the time of their December 1968 Crossroads gig and completely disappeared from the American musical scene. I was privileged to be part of that garage band. You will hear my bandmates refer to me as Jack. This nickname was due to my being one of 3 related John McDermotts living at that time. After I left home for college, people began calling me by my given name, John. In fact, my wife, Sally, always called me John. I am once again honored to be in the virtual presence of 2 of my bandmates from that heady and prolific time period. With me on this podcast are my friends, the infamous Shannon Brothers, David Douglas, a.k.a. William McKinley Shannon, and Richard Charles, a.k.a. King Rick Shannon. Welcome back to the podcast. That band sure loved the tremolo effect. Here we are at the Rock and Roll Flashback Podcast, and I'm talking to my former bandmates, the Shannon Brothers. David Douglas, a.k.a. William McKinley Shannon, and Richard Charles, a.k.a. King Rick Shannon. Good to have you both here. I know that there was times during our garage band days when we just had to get outside of the garage, and sometimes it was to try to meet the public. In other words, there was a groundswell of demand to hear our music in person and live. What are your recollections of that?
Well, all I can remember is that the garage was very confined.
Yes.
It was so damn loud. Whether it was really hot in the summertime and in the wintertime, ice cold. So I think we took a couple of times to take advantage just to get out and feel the fresh air every now and then. And I remember going out and also to just hear a different sound, because when you're in that confined space of the garage, it was just deafening. Our ears would be ringing for days after each time we played. So I think going outside, we thought, hey, that's going to be fun to go out here and do it. Of course, in doing so, it does attract people, and it certainly attracted the 12 and 13-year-old girls that lived down the street, and they came up and they were dancing a little bit. I think the Dunnings and Debbie Dunning, and I can't remember who else was down there, but it was, that was our outdoors festival.
Festival is a good way of putting it. And also, this has been after our big gig.
Yeah, I think it was before. I think it was.
It was before all the instruments came.
Okay.
We used to play 2 guitars and a drum.
Okay. And Dave was playing bass guitar or rhythm guitar.
Rhythm guitar.
And we did House of the Rising Sun. We remember doing that.
And I remember doing Light My Fire. We did that outside too. And I
remember doing that outside.
I remember that. And then the other one, I think we did Paint It Black is the other one we tried.
Well, if we did Light My Fire, we must have done it sans keyboards.
Yeah.
Because if you didn't have it built.
Back in 67.
Okay.
Was it that early? Wow. That could have been, actually.
What? And the police only came one time?
Only one.
Only once they came, but we had complaints, several
Okay.
complaints. Yeah,
Several complaints.
yeah.
Okay.
And I think my dad even talked to Don Little, because he was an attorney, and thinking, what do we do to protect ourselves in case we
Oh,
get...
yeah, because he was your next door neighbor, right?
Yeah,
Mr.
right.
Little? Yeah.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about other bands that started out as garage bands, but actually moved on to fame and wealth. You think about Van Halen,
The Ramones.
the Ramones.
Ramones, yeah.
And I think a lot of people were influenced by the impact that came when the Beatles came here. The Beach Boys were doing okay, and there was a lot of other groups that were trying to make it, like I mentioned, the Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons, but the Beatles, they actually wrote their own material
And played their own instrument.
and played their own instruments. I mean, that was just pretty impressive. I think a lot of young males were buying guitars then. I mean, you go down through a lot of the people in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame now that probably would say, well, that had an effect on them, from Tom Petty to whomever, it's Ramones, anybody. Bruce Springsteen. In fact, I think Springsteen, I read somewhere, he liked Dave Clark 5.
That's interesting.
So a lot of people got started back then at the same time. Just some of them had a different trajectory in their careers, and they maybe had some more talent. I don't know if the talent was a factor or not.
The Ramones had no talent. Or Iggy Pop, guys like that.
Yes.
Stooges.
Yeah.
I mean, they just wailed. They just turned up the volume and they just went crazy. That's MC5 is another. You talk about a garage band, out of Detroit. I mean, those guys were in your face kind of style.
Yeah.
Just crazy punk early on. But yeah, the Beatles, I mean, I think you're right, Jack. Everybody picked up the guitar and we tried to emulate them. We wrote songs, same style, chord, verse, chorus type of thing to try to...
Rolling Stones.
Rolling Stones, yeah.
Rolling Stones, we did. Yeah, I think the Beatles, though, were the initial punch into the industry, and then the others started following. The Rolling Stones were real close behind. But to me, it was the Dave Clark 5 that had the melody and the rhythm that went with it.
Well, they had appeared, I think, 17 times. They were the most to appear on Ed Sullivan. And of course, that was a big deal back then.
Oh, yeah, it was huge.
Powerful sound.
And a little bit American Bandstand, too. Dick Clark had a few bands on there at the time. Mm-hmm. He had not quite the hard rock, but he had a few.
When were Shindig and Hullabaloo big? Was that a little bit later in the...
It was 65, 66. Mm-hmm. It was Hullabaloo, I think. Yeah, and that's when you bring in all sorts of other media. The other groups that I can remember were the Buckinghams. When the Buckinghams came out, they had
Kind of a drag.
Yeah, kind of a drag. They had a similar style, but they had more melody, more elaborate melodies than I think that any of the other groups did.
So we were influenced by the Yardbirds, the Doors, of course, Led Zeppelin,
Dave Clark 5.
Dave Clark 5, Cream and Emerson, Lake and Palmer. I also thought Neil Young, some of his stuff was, I tried to emulate some of that, particularly with Cowgirl. Cinnamon Girl, I like the song, but I don't think if we did it, we didn't do it very well.
We did it for a long time.
Did we?
I remember we went on all day that bass line.
Okay. My part was probably pretty rough.
Did you mention the Doors?
Yeah, the Doors, big influence with the Doors.
And Hendrix to some degree.
Hendrix, yeah. And even the Kinks in a certain way. I think I really liked what Van Halen did with You Really Got Me.
Yeah.
Yeah, that music was powerful, and I think that it was easy to try to do something similar, but try to do it the same way is obviously very difficult. Now for some quasi bagpipe music featuring the Magnus organ. Another big hit from the Limited Sensation Domaine. David challenged us as what kind of music were we doing, and I looked up Wikipedia. It says this about drone metal music. Typically, the electric guitar is performed with a large amount of reverb or audio feedback, while vocals may or may not be present. Songs often lack beat or rhythm in a traditional sense and are typically very long. And I thought, oh, that kind of sounds like it. So I would characterize the Limited Sensations Domaine's music as an early example of free-form drone metal. Is there a genre of rock music that either of you feel would also be appropriate? David, do you have any ideas?
No.
No?
Psychedelic.
Psychedelic. Okay.
Yes.
Electrical Storm.
Oh, Electrical Storm?
Yeah.
Ah.
That's what it reminded me of. Just a bunch of electricity and sound and loud.
That's a good way to describe it. I think we enhanced our hearing abilities with certain things that made it sound like that. They were, the feedback was, I think that was the essence of the band. And you perfected that, Jack, with your Kent guitar, hollow body guitar in front of the 250 watt amp. And you beat Jimmy Page to that because you laid that guitar right up in front of the amp and let it go. And whatever sounds came out, we played to.
And the skill involved in that is just unbelievable.
Oh, it's massive. Yeah, you have to control that feedback, otherwise it runs away from you.
I spent hours at home perfecting that.
I remember practicing songs on the piano in the living room and doing that for hours and hours, and it was bothering my parents.
Uh-oh.
I think everything bothered our parents.
Yeah, your parents did what mine never could have done, and that is tolerated us.
They were good people. They were.
Oh, yeah. Well, as we've discussed before, I would hang out with them. You would both be out on dates on a Saturday night, and I'd be down in the family room watching TV with your parents with my Carling Black Label in my hand. And I think you said you have a photo of that somewhere.
Yes, I do.
This singer sure must be in big trouble. I'm in trouble. Well, that was interesting. Well, and that makes a nice segue to my next question for us all. Is there's a list of great rock musicians who, of course, were very talented, but could not read sheet music, and the list is extensive. I was just going down through some of them. Prince, Eric Clapton, Michael Jackson, Bob Dylan, Paul McCartney, Eddie Van Halen, and so on. Now, I don't claim that I or any of us had even an ounce of those musicians' greatness. However, my parents insisted that I take piano lessons first in East Lansing, Michigan, and then in Monroeville, Pennsylvania. Those 8 years of lessons, I think, were invaluable. They enabled me to read music. Maybe couldn't sing worth a lick, but at least I could read music. I was self-taught on guitar. How would you describe your musicianship? In other words, did you ever take music lessons besides? You never took piano lessons, either of you. Is that correct?
Correct.
I never took piano lessons.
Okay.
I just learned chords and playing on the piano in the living room and learned a bunch of chords. I was still terrible, and I could make a lot of noise.
Yes. And Rick, you playing the trumpet, could you read music?
Yeah, I could read music.
Okay.
Yeah, but I hated the trumpet because it required too much effort. And I had asthma, so every time I blew into the trumpet, my natural progression was try to find another instrument that was better, which was either the guitar, and then because you played the guitar, we played together, but obviously you were more superbly talented than I was in the guitar. I decided, I'll play rhythm. I will play rhythm. So for whatever reason, I always liked rhythm. I always rocked when I was a little kid, back and forth, banging my head on steps, pounding my fingers on the table. So that just seemed the natural thing for me.
My primary instrument with the band was guitar. I did play a little bit of organ at first when we were using that Magnus organ, but my primary was the guitar.
And harmonica.
and harmonica.
Yeah.
And every once in a while I hit the tambourine or the can.
Yeah.
How about you, David? What was your primary instrument with the band?
Keyboards.
Keyboards.
Keyboards and rhythm guitar. I never could play lead guitar.
And
I couldn't get
sometimes
the
you
volume down.
played some bass too every once in a while.
I played bass on a standard guitar. We didn't have a bass guitar. We should have had one, and I should have played it. I'm sure I could have done well on that.
Your two favorite chords, of course, were C and D.
And keyboard, and I couldn't even play that.
And heaven forbid we throw in a D minor. I think we played a lot of A minor and E minor. I believe.
Yeah, and yeah, E minor is key of G, and A minor is a key of C, and those are really easy to play. Of course, the key of C is pretty much the white keys on the keyboard. But I think we mentioned that sometimes your keys on the Vox Jaguar were unresponsive. You push on a note and it wouldn't.
It became that way. Initially, it worked. It all worked. But after a lot of use, some of the keys didn't work.
You pounded on the keyboard, probably.
It could be a sign of American craftsmanship. Whoever built that, maybe.
Ha! Well, let's not blame it on the makers. You know?
The makers, right?
We did. It's a capacitor fell out somewhere along the way.
Yeah. Wait, two chords, C and D.
C and D. Base it on a C and D. Well, that leads me into my next question, because critical for all garage bands is equipment. I know we started out with a little Magnus organ. I purchased that around 1963 at SS Kresge Company in the Miracle Mile Shopping Center. I remember that.
Yes, indeed. I was with you.
Yeah. That wasn't the time you lost a $20 bill, was it?
Oof, I hope I didn't do that.
Okay. Well, you've forgotten that already. That's good. That's good. You'll sleep better tonight.
That's when we borrowed some sulfur. Wasn't that it? Same time?
That may be.
Yeah.
That may be.
Wanted to make gunpowder.
Yeah, we wanted gunpowder. So the Magnus organ was kind of a backgroundy kind of thing, because it had a series of chords. Some of the buttons you push for chords, and then you had a little space where you could do maybe one octave of a running hand melody.
Yep. Correct.
It was only one octave.
Was it more than one octave?
Or two octaves.
Okay. Then you had an acoustic guitar, which I'm pretty sure was a harmony.
Yes, it was Dave's harmony.
It's mine. I took guitar lessons.
Yeah.
Okay, and that was the one that
had the bridge was so high that you had to take a hammer to pull down the string. I mean, you can play more than 3 strings on it because you can't. Your fingers aren't that strong. I don't even think Superman could do it.
I distinctly remember how difficult it was to push down on the strings.
Yes.
And then, of course, the 1965, you got the Harmony solid body electric guitar. Really, that was our main guitar for at least a year until I got a Kent Americana hollow body. And I also got a small tube amp. I bought them around 1966. There was a music store, and I don't remember the name of it, but a music store selling musical equipment that was near the intersection of Mosside Boulevard and Northern Pike in Monroeville. I don't know if you guys remember that store or not.
Yeah, I remember. It was near the bowling alley.
Yeah, but
yes,
the amp was just an inexpensive, low wattage, 15 watt maybe.
It wasn't a PV?
No. It was just a generic, it was really a piece of crap. And it only had one volume and one tone control, and the volume didn't go very loud. That's why I never used it down at your house. It was just kept up at
practice
at my house. And then, of course, we expanded with, I think we've talked about, probably in the early months of 1968 with the Heath kit. We had the TA-17 1968 guitar amp stack.
Yes, indeed.
And you think that was 250 watt?
I believe it. It was loud. I remember it was loud. It was, I believe, a 15-inch speaker.
Yeah, they had big speakers. They had a treble speaker and a bass speaker.
Yeah, I guess they were, because they were stacked.
Because it was at least 4.5 feet up.
Yeah, it was tall.
Yeah.
So I think you're right, Dave. There was a treble speaker because it had a switch that you go to the treble speaker or to the bass speaker, or you put it in the middle and you can get both speakers. I think that's exactly right. So there were two. I think it was a 15-inch bass speaker and then maybe a 10-inch treble speaker, now that I recall wiring those things. So, yeah, my dad and I built that. He was a great guy. He was loved to tinker. He loved to build TVs, like we had said before. So this was, he could participate with us. I think he liked to do that. So, yeah.
Did he help when you were building the Vox Jaguar V304 organ? Did he help with that too?
Oh, yeah. He was, yeah, Dave and I were not really bright kids when it came to electronics, but my dad was a genius. So he laid out everything. He had all the instructions, and then I remember going down there every night and wiring stuff and taking capacitors, transistors, resistors, and
soldering.
A lot of soldering.
A lot of soldering.
The circuit boards.
So yeah, it was quite an undertaking.
So it was a good father-son bonding.
It was totally bonding. Yeah, he was a good man, and he loved to do that. It was, I think secretly he wanted to be a band member, but we never invited him in.
He did.
Okay, so that takes us into 1968. The Slingerland drum kit.
Yes.
That was your first drum kit?
My first drum kit was a Slingerland. It was a snare, two tom-toms, two tom-toms and a large tom, and one cymbal and a hi-hat. And it was a good set. It was nice. And then probably beat that thing to pieces, and then eventually got the Gretsch.
For your birthday?
Yeah, for my birthday. I think it was my 18th birthday. I can't remember.
You knew Nancy because I think she was there.
Yeah, maybe in my 20th birthday, something like that. Yeah,
well,
so I got that set.
Probably when we went to the infamous Crossroads gig, you used the Slingerland.
Don't know. I think
because you would have been 18 at Crossroads.
Yeah, it was a Slingerland set because I remember it wasn't as heavy, and the skins were not as firm as they were on the Gretsch. So the Gretsch came after our infamous episode.
Going back to the Heathkit TA-17 amp, did we haul that to Crossroads?
Yes, we did.
Because I would imagine it weighed something.
Yeah, we definitely took that with us. Okay. I also remember one of the nagging things about that amp, and I don't know whether it's part of the way it was constructed, but obviously I can't blame myself for wiring it incorrectly. But when you turned it on, there was that just buzz. There was always that buzz that was going on. And when you'd stick, a guitar in or pull it out, it was that loud pop.
Yeah.
Pop. Pop.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but we did take that, I do recall.
Okay. The wah-wah, was it a like a Dunlop crybaby, or don't we remember?
I'm guessing it was a crybaby because they really didn't have that many wahs back then, other than the crybaby. That was, Hendrix' go-to, so I think that was it.
And did you buy that originally, Dave, for the keyboard, or just to have the band?
I don't think I got it for the keyboard. I think it was for the guitars originally. I ended up putting it on the keyboard, give it that psychedelic effect.
Yeah. Going back to what you said, psychedelic. Yeah. And none of us remembers the details about our Stompbox effects pedal, which we did have.
I saw that picture. The only thing I can think is the original Stompbox was probably a compressor. I don't think it was a fuzz. I don't think so. Because I think we were trying to get that feedback through the amp. So I think it may have been a compressor, but I don't know what it was.
They weren't called compressors back then. The industry exploded in the latter part of the 60s.
60s, right.
But there weren't a whole lot to choose from. Now you can go...
Oh, yeah, get pedal boards of every kind, shape, and sound. I think our original distortion pedal was the Big Muff Fuzz. And I know we played with that, but I don't remember what that initial box was. It could have been just a generic distortion pedal, I don't know, or compressor, I'm not sure.
Okay.
But it worked.
It worked.
Obviously.
Was it in the winter time that you were building the Heathkit amps and the Vox Jaguar, or was that?
Yeah, it was probably during the winter time, but The amp was the first thing. That was the first project. That was that big 250 watt or 500, I don't know how many watts it was, but my dad and I worked on the head and the amp. That was quite a bit of work, to do that, but it was fun.
Was the keyboard built after the amp then?
Yeah.
The
I worked on the keyboard.
Because everything was in the garage. You know, those photos we have of the summer of '68 when you got back from Hawaii. Obviously, you weren't building it while you were in Hawaii, and you went to Hawaii, I believe, in June, was it?
It was June.
July.
Yeah, so it was in your garage at that time. We don't have any way to refute anything we say here, so everything we say is gospel, but...
Dana Smith's nephew was going to be there to play bass with us. He came from California.
Oh, yeah, when was that?
68.
Oh, was that the same summer?
It was the same summer.
I vaguely remember him because he and I were doing some things with guitars and he was showing me a couple things that he knew. Did he actually play bass with us at all or not?
No, he never did.
Yeah. Well, somehow I met him though. At one point I met him. I forget the circumstances.
Remember I tried to mic the drums by putting the microphones inside the shells, and it just was
Too
way
loud.
too loud.
Too loud.
Yeah, we couldn't,
So did we have like Shure mics or at that time?
I think they were sure.
Were they?
They weren't very good.
Okay.
A lot of feedback. What was the train?
Yeah.
That was a good one.
Well, and you must have been exhausted after drumming that.
What was I doing?
Yeah, the whole
That
time.
was funny. Sort of reminded me of the train come along, the group, the same, not Aerosmith.
Aerosmith, but Yardbirds did it first.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, the Yardbirds did it because that's
What
when they had Jimmy Page and Jeff Beck. They were doing Train Kept a Rollin'.
Keep a rolling.
Train Keep a Rollin', it's called.
Yeah.
That was the Yardbird song that Keith Ralph would sing, and I guess he would play harmonica too. And then, of course, you had Beck and Page. They weren't together for a long time there, but that must have been amazing to see the two of them in performance together,
Yeah.
jamming. That would.
They were together in the movie Blow Up.
Yes, they were. Yeah, that's when originally they were going to have the Who be in the movie, and they backed out. And the director wanted Beck to smash his guitar, a la Townsend. And he found he had an inexpensive Hofner, I think, is what he smashed for the movie. Another musical sample from the Limited Sensation Domain GarageBand's musical archives.
This is the 1965 Harmony Comet.
Okay.
And that was also part of the cache from Morgantown.
Okay. Good.
In addition, we had assembled, and that may have been the snare drum, and then another guitar that had 3 humbuckers on it. Dave, you liberated that from our hands and did something with it. I don't know what it was. It was there one day, it was gone the next.
Well, hopefully he didn't use the patented recording technique of immersing it in water.
Yes, that was the best microphone technique ever.
Yeah. Dave started his collegiate career, his stellar collegiate career.
In Earl Point Park.
Yeah.
It's when I was sitting at home, living at home for the first year I went to Point Park. It's when I think I first got involved with you. And then the next year, I was at the dorms, and we were doing everything during the summer.
Yeah.
Okay. But the first year you went to West Virginia, right?
In 66 and 67, I went to West Virginia.
Okay, so that's when we would have had access to your bedroom at 1340.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And some instruments.
and some instruments too, yeah.
Yeah.
While we were being influenced by the popular bands of the day, and we've mentioned them, the Yardbirds, the Doors, Led Zeppelin, Cream, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Neil Young, etc., much of our garage-produced music seemed to be a byproduct of our equipment, and we're going to get to that in a minute. But in other words, I think that our songs had very limited structure. Dave said it was kind of like an electric storm, a thunderstorm, often without any lyrics or advanced planning. Even though I'd come up with things, or maybe Dave would on a piano, but we really didn't plan out too well. We used a lot of volume, distortion, feedback, and we also occasionally used unusual instruments and techniques, such as dropping the amp a couple inches to get the spring to vibrate like thunder.
Crash.
Rick also mentioned, I had forgotten this, we also used your family's antique dinner chimes.
That was my aunt's.
Yeah.
East Liberty, and they actually used it.
We also used a music box on one song.
It was a little guitar. It was a plastic guitar that you.
Yeah, and played a song like Bucko's Weasel.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that should have been played over Point Park also.
No, that would have been a hit, actually.
Yeah. Any comments you have about the special Shannon garage layout at 1340? The ambiance, the effect of the clutter, that ladder that hung overhead, maybe that had a reverb effect. Anything about the acoustics? I know we've talked about how very organized your father, his pegboard was with his tools, but any comments about the...
It was your standard suburban two-car garage, cinder block walls. My dad had a third of it set off with his tools and whatever he did. We took over the other two-thirds. They were shelves along either side, and all the stuff was up there. And I think there was a small window, on that side by the
Yeah,
shelf.
a small window on the side.
Yeah. So we didn't have a whole lot of room. It was really crowded because it's your typical garage where there's a lawnmower, wheelbarrow. My dad had all his lawn stuff in there. So I took a spot over by the shelves with the window because we could put towels and heavy blankets up there, not only to keep the sound down, but to keep the cold from coming in because it used to get really cold. And then Dave went over to the other opposite side with the keyboards, and Jack, you had sort of free roam of the whole garage depending on how far your guitar cord would go. And that was pretty much it. We usually did not open the garage door. We kept it shut. And we had the tape player, the reel-to-reel was smack right in the middle of the room. And when we turned that thing on, all you could hear was, wow, sound everywhere. I think I did move the drums around at one point because I was over by my dad's tools, and we felt badly about interrupting his workspace, so I moved it around to the side where we could have a little bit more space for us and more space for him.
So there was no modern foam panels that we put up to absorb the sound. What about amped microphones? I know if we wanted to do a vocal, we had a regular microphone, but did we amp up any microphones other than that?
I amped up a microphone on my drums. I tried that on the bass drum and then also on the snare. I taped the microphone underneath the snare. I always turned the snare off because when the snares were on, it was zzz. Yeah. So I always turned the snare off, and it was just like 4 tom-toms I was playing on. But I wanted to get a little bit more volume out of the snare, and I used to put the microphone in there and thinking that we could run a tremolo or reverb through that microphone in the drum. So I think we were pioneers in figuring out how to do drum sonics. So yeah.
Which amp did you use? Did we use 2 inputs on one amp?
We did. We had 2 inputs on the Heathkit. We had
2 amps.
But there was also another amp that you had, Dave, underneath the keyboard. I don't remember what that was, but we could run 2 guitars or 2 leads into the Heathkit amp.
There may have been times when we had the guitar and the keyboard in that amp.
In the amp.
There may
But
have been.
I think Dave had a separate amp because we wanted to get more of a stereo feel.
Well, that was impressive. We used the wah-wah on the keyboards. We also used it with the guitar.
Right.
That would be a key component on Tales of Brave Ulysses, because that's how Eric Clapton played that progression he had in that song with Cream, was with the wah-wah. I couldn't quite emulate him, but
you came close.
Came close.
But we had the wall of sound, so that wah, I think, provided that extra push of feedback through the speakers, because you had the hollow body at the time. Remember how that would just resonate?
Yeah.
That was pretty wild. Yeah. So the wah was the key.
I'm starting to, as I go through some of these cassettes, which are obviously copies of songs from reel to cassette, I'm starting to find some things that are coming back to me, like Here's a Toast to the Most from A Piece of Toast. And kind of amusing to hear that again. It's a lot going on in multi-speakers, but it was kind of neat to see how we were trying to put together multi-track recording back in the day.
Yeah, we used to do a lot of multi-tracking, and then also the panning back and forth. We did a lot of panning on the tape deck to get that cross stereo sound.
Now, in addition to the 30-minute song, there was also the 15-minute song.
I don't remember that one.
Jack, all of them were 15-minute songs for what?
and base it on a C&D, was that wasn't part of the 30-minute song?
Yes, actually.
That wasn't.
No, that was just another issue.
You were just playing those chords.
Yeah.
Well, part of it was the keyboard itself. There were some notes that didn't work. So there are a couple of keys that weren't making sound. So I guess that's why Dave liked certain chords that he could play that we could hear. At least that's what I surmised.
Yeah, and going through my memory, of course, I remember that I always thought that Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You and Chicago's 25 or 6 to 4, Led Zeppelin and Chicago, that progression kind of went the same way. And so I think that was one that we did a few times just because it was the same same downward progression. Cowgirl in the Sand was one that I think we like to do because it did go on and on forever.
Right.
House of the Rising Sun, I remember, because I've been playing that ever since I started playing guitar. Inagata Davida, one of the songs that I found on the cassette the other day kind of reminded me a little bit of Iron Butterfly. Shapes of Things by the Yardbirds, Season of the Witch. All of them were songs that we manipulated and corrupted in our way. But what about the Great Gate of Kiev?
That was a masterpiece.
Yes.
So I guess, we liked this. My dad listened to the Great Gate of Kiev all the time. And so Dave and I grew up with that music. And so it has that similar da, 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 that kind of almost rock kind of feel to it.
Yeah.
So that's what we picked up, and that was before Emerson, Lake and Palmer tried to copy it.
And Morning Dew, well, Jeff Beck would have come out with that probably around 68, 69, that time period, with Rod Stewart singing. That was one that I actually found a recording of that we had done with multiple harmonies.
But we didn't do Nicky Hopkins on the piano. I don't think that happened. But.
1 and 2 and 3, clap.
That was a musical snapshot of music by the Limited Sensation Domaine Garage Band. This has been Rock and Roll Flashback, a podcast called Shades of Past, Recollections of a Garage Band, Part 2, where we have reminisced about one of America's iconic garage bands, the Limited Sensation Domaine. I'm Jumpin John McDermott, and until next time,
rock on, rock on, rock on, rock on, rock on. Thank you.